biggest companies is defending the tariffs. Quote, leadership is about doing what's right, not what's popular, and hitting back will not lead to anything good.
In the summer of 2025, Canadians woke up to a flood of shocking headlines on social media. Posts claimed that the western provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and even parts of British Columbia had signed a WEXIT deal to break away from Canada. The wording was dramatic. Canada is over, the West has left, and WEXIT becomes reality. On TikTok and YouTube, short videos with bold text and red flashing sirens spread like wildfire. Hashtags like hashtag WEXIT 2025 and hashtag Canada breakup trended for days. So what exactly did people think had happened, and what really happened?
Will decline. That is the CEO of Shopify. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who lived in America for 20 years, joins us now from Toronto. Doug, thanks so much for joining us. Where do you think this goes from here?
According to posts on TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube, the Western provinces supposedly signed a pact to leave Canada and form a new country. Some posts went even further, suggesting that Alberta and Saskatchewan were preparing to join the United States, while others imagined a new alliance of Western states that would control oil, gas, and agriculture. To an online audience hungry for big headlines, this sounded like history in the making. The truth is much less explosive. In July 2025, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario signed a Memorandum of Understanding (MOU) to cooperate on major infrastructure projects. These included pipelines, trade corridors, and critical mineral development. Around the same time, Manitoba and Saskatchewan were working on another MOU to support the Churchill shipping route through Hudson Bay, which could open new export opportunities for Western Canada.
28 states rely on us to for the products that they ship up, and I just want to build a strong AmCan fortress, the strongest, most prosperous, safest two countries.
MOUs are not binding deals to leave Canada. They are agreements between provinces to explore projects together, share studies, and build economic partnerships. They have no power to dissolve Confederation. But because the language used in some press releases spoke about greater autonomy and taking control of our economic future, online commentators twisted the story into something much bigger. Why did this get spun as WEXIT? First, the West's history of tension with Ottawa made it believable. People in Alberta and Saskatchewan often feel that their natural resources are used to fund programs in other provinces through equalization payments, while federal rules make it harder to build pipelines. Second, the timing was perfect. At the same moment these MOUs were signed, Alberta passed new referendum rules that made it easier for citizens to push for a sovereignty vote. Put these two developments together and you get the perfect recipe for an online rumor. Finally, the very word WEXIT is catchy. Like Brexit before it, it simplifies a complex political debate into one bold phrase that spreads fast on social media. For many Canadians scrolling their feeds, the nuance didn't matter. They saw deal, signed, and WEXIT in the same sentence and assumed Canada was breaking apart. The other reason WEXIT talk flared up in 2025 is Alberta's new referendum law. In May, Premier Danielle Smith's government passed Bill 54, a law that changed how citizen-led referendums work in the province.
Cutting you off critical minerals. Who has the critical minerals? Canada, Ontario. We have a high-grade nickel that we ship 50% down to the U.S. for your military. And
before Bill 54, anyone who wanted to trigger a referendum needed to collect signatures from 20% of Alberta's voters within 90 days. That was a huge challenge, requiring around 465,000 names in just 3 months. For activists without major funding, it was nearly impossible. Bill 54 lowered the bar significantly. Now, only 10% of voters need to sign a petition, about 177,000 people, and they have 2 years to collect the signatures. This is still a serious task, but it is far more achievable than before. For sovereignty activists, this was a gift. Groups pushing for Alberta independence, or at least a sovereignty vote, immediately began planning campaigns to reach the new threshold. Social media pages and community meetings encouraged supporters to sign petitions, arguing that this was their chance to finally have a say on Alberta's future. Even though most Albertans are not in favor of full separation, the new rules mean the issue can't easily be brushed aside. Saskatchewan added fuel to the fire as well. Premier Scott Moe made headlines by saying he would not block a referendum if Saskatchewan citizens organized one. He did not openly call for separation, but his stance suggested that the province was willing to let people decide if they wanted a sovereignty vote. That position gave separatists more confidence, especially since Saskatchewan and Alberta share many of the same grievances about federal policies. Together, Alberta's Bill 54 and Saskatchewan's openness created a new political climate. Even though no province has legally moved to leave Canada, the idea of a referendum suddenly felt closer to reality than it had in years. When combined with the MOUs on pipelines and corridors, it was easy for online influencers to connect the dots wrongly and say that a WEXIT deal had already been signed.
4.3 million barrels a day. Just imagine if he didn't have the 1.2 billion barrels a year coming into the U.S.
Even though the internet was buzzing with claims of a WEXIT deal, actual polling in 2025 painted a very different picture. The numbers showed that while frustration is real, the appetite for full separation remains a minority view across the western provinces. In Alberta, surveys showed that roughly 1 in 3 people supported the idea of leaving Canada. But when asked if they would definitely vote yes in a referendum, that number dropped even lower. This means that while many Albertans are open to the idea in theory, far fewer are ready to take the big leap when it comes to a binding vote. For many, the threat of separation is more of a bargaining tool to push Ottawa for better deals, not a plan they truly want to see carried out. In Saskatchewan, the picture was similar, but a little softer. Polls showed that support for separation was there, but not as strong as in Alberta. Many people shared the same complaints: unfair treatment of resources, anger at federal environmental rules, and frustration with equalization payments. But they were less likely to say they wanted out completely. For most, the priority was getting more control over provincial decisions rather than cutting ties with Canada altogether.
Brian, we need to work together and be two strong nations, not separated.
Well, I'll tell you, to just take a little excerpt from President Trump's Truth Social post. It says,
in British Columbia, the conversation took a different turn. A growing number of residents, nearly 28% in some polls, said they liked the idea of BC going its own way. This wasn't always about joining a Western bloc like Alberta and Saskatchewan. Instead, some British Columbians expressed interest in BC alone, an independent Pacific province that could chart its own path on trade, climate policy, and relations with Asia. Still, even with the rise in numbers, it was clear that support was well below the majority threshold. In Manitoba, support for separation was weakest. A strong majority wanted to stay within Canada. While people there shared concerns about the economy and infrastructure, they were less drawn to separatist movements. The province's more central location and stronger economic ties to Ontario made it harder for separatism to take root. Put together, these numbers show that talk of WEXIT in 2025 was more smoke than fire. The idea was being shared widely online, but the ground reality was that most Western Canadians were not ready to break up the country.
we don't need anything they have. We have unlimited energy. We should make our own cars and have more lumber than we could ever use. Without the massive subsidy, Canada ceases to exist as a viable country. He takes that mindset into negotiations with...
The support that did exist was fragmented, strongest in Alberta, weaker in Saskatchewan, mixed in BC, and barely present in Manitoba. Even if Western provinces wanted to leave Canada, the law makes it extremely difficult. Canada's own history with Quebec's separation in the 1990s set the rules that would apply today. In 1998, the Supreme Court of Canada made a landmark ruling on the question of secession. The court said clearly that no province can unilaterally leave Canada. In other words, Alberta or Saskatchewan cannot simply pass a law or sign a declaration to exit Confederation. If a province held a referendum and won, it would not immediately mean independence. Instead, the result would create a duty to negotiate with the federal government and the other provinces. The court also said that a valid referendum must show a clear majority on a clear question. This means the question asked to voters cannot be vague, and the result cannot be based on a slim margin. For example, a question like, should Alberta seek greater autonomy, would not be enough. It would need to be direct. such as should Alberta separate from Canada and become an independent country? And if the result was something like 51% yes and 49% no, Ottawa could argue that this was not a clear enough majority to break up the country. To make these rules official, Parliament passed the Clarity Act in 2000. This law gave Ottawa the authority to decide if a referendum question was clear and if the results showed a clear majority. That means even if a province holds a vote, the federal government still gets to judge if it meets the legal standard. If not, the result could be challenged or even dismissed. What does this mean for WEXIT? In simple terms, it means the path to separation is long, messy, and uphill. It would take years of negotiations, involve changes to the Constitution, and require agreement from multiple players across Canada. Unlike Brexit, where the European Union had a legal process for a country to leave, Canada has no quick exit clause. The system is built to protect national unity and make sure secession cannot happen overnight. One of the biggest challenges that separatist movements face, and one that often gets ignored in online debates, is the role of Indigenous nations. Across Western Canada, Indigenous peoples have constitutional rights that are protected under treaties and the Canadian Constitution. These treaties were signed not with Alberta or Saskatchewan, but with the Crown, meaning the federal government. If a province tried to leave Canada, it could not simply take Indigenous lands and treaty obligations with it. Indigenous nations would have to be part of any negotiation, and many leaders have already said they do not support leaving Canada. This creates a huge legal and political roadblock. Even if Alberta voted yes in a referendum, Indigenous nations could challenge the result in court, arguing that their land and rights cannot be transferred to a new country without their consent. That would mean even more layers of negotiation, uncertainty, and potential conflict.
Today, so what do you think happens?
Well, first of all, about the autos, we buy as many autos as we sell down there, and the ones we sell, 50% have American parts. It's so intertwined since.
In 2025, this issue became even more significant because of new legal rulings that strengthened Indigenous land and title rights. Courts across Canada have been recognizing Indigenous authority over land use and resource projects more strongly than ever before. These decisions mean that any attempt to redraw borders or claim ownership of land without Indigenous consent would likely fail in court. This is why experts say the Indigenous question makes secession almost impossible in practice. Even if Alberta or Saskatchewan could get enough public support and win a referendum, they would still need to negotiate not only with Ottawa, but also with dozens of Indigenous nations. The process would be long, complicated, and full of obstacles. The Indigenous perspective also reminds us that Canada is not just a country of provinces. It is also a country built on agreements with First Nations nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Any future debate about WEXIT has to respect this reality. Ignoring it would not only be unjust, but also legally unworkable. Whenever talk of WEXIT comes up, one of the first questions is simple. Would it even make financial sense? The economy is the heart of the debate, and it is also the reason separation is so complicated. At first glance, some Westerners believe leaving Canada would free their provinces to control their own resources. Alberta and Saskatchewan, for example, are rich in oil, gas, and agriculture. They argue that Ottawa's regulations and taxes make it harder to profit from those industries. The recent interprovincial MOUs on pipelines and trade corridors show how eager the provinces are to create direct routes for exports. These agreements are about building infrastructure within Canada, moving oil, natural gas, and minerals east and west, and even reviving northern shipping routes like the Port of Churchill. But while they strengthen provincial cooperation, they are not the same as secession. Pipelines and trade routes need national and even international agreements, which means provinces cannot do it alone. Another major point is equalization payments. This is one of the biggest grievances in Alberta politics. Equalization is a federal program where wealthier provinces contribute money that helps support public services in poorer provinces. Alberta does not receive equalization. Instead, it contributes heavily because of its oil wealth. Many Albertans feel this is unfair. They see their money going to provinces like Quebec, while Alberta struggles with boom and bust cycles in oil prices.
Use about 21 million barrels a day We ship 4.3 million barrels down. 60% of your energy is relied on Canada. Ontario alone.
But the reality of equalization is often misunderstood. Equalization does not actually take money directly out of Alberta's provincial budget. It comes from federal taxes collected across the country. Alberta pays more because its people earn more on average, not because Ottawa is taking money from the Alberta Treasury. Still, the perception is powerful, and for many Albertans, it feels like they are bankrolling the rest of the country. This emotional weight makes equalization a rallying cry for separatists, even if the financial details are more complex. A third piece of the economic puzzle is Alberta's talk of creating its own pension plan. Right now, Albertans contribute to the Canada Pension Plan, CPP, which is pooled with other provinces to provide retirement income. Alberta politicians have argued that if the province left the CPP, it could set up its own plan and keep more money at home. In fact, studies have suggested Alberta contributes more than it gets back in pensions, so supporters claim an Alberta pension plan could offer lower premiums or higher benefits. But here too, the reality is complicated. Leaving the CPP would require delicate negotiations with Ottawa. The amount of money Alberta could actually withdraw is contested, and moving millions of people to a new pension system would be risky and expensive. Many Albertans themselves are nervous about tampering with pensions, especially older residents who depend on predictable payments. This issue highlights how even policies that sound straightforward become tangled once you consider legal, financial, and social realities. In the end, the economics of WEXIT make it a shaky idea. Provinces are tied to Canada through trade, banking, currency, and national programs. Breaking away would not only mean rewriting laws, but also renegotiating debts, pensions, and trade agreements. Instead of solving problems, separation could create a wave of new ones. That is why most economists warn that leaving Canada would likely bring more financial instability than freedom. While the provinces were stirring the pot with MOUs and referendum rules, the federal government also had to show its hand. In March 2025, Mark Carney, the former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, became Prime Minister. Carney entered office with a reputation for financial expertise and calm leadership. He also came in at a moment when national unity was suddenly being tested again. Carney's strategy has been to balance Western grievances with federal authority. On one side, he has acknowledged that Western Canadians feel frustrated and unheard. He has promised to take their concerns seriously, especially when it comes to pipelines, resource development, and fair distribution of wealth. His speeches have often used the language of listening, partnership, and building bridges. On the other side, Carney has made it clear that Canada will remain one country. He has pointed back to the Supreme Court ruling and the Clarity Act, reminding everyone that the path to secession is narrow and legally strict. His government has also hinted at offering new federal investments in national corridors, projects that would make it easier to move goods and energy across the country. This could include supporting the Churchill shipping route, improving rail infrastructure, and helping provinces develop critical mineral projects. In this way, Ottawa's message has been firm but calm. The West is valued, the West will be heard, but Canada is not breaking apart. By promoting federal support for infrastructure while quietly pushing back against separatist rumors, Carney hopes to lower the temperature. The challenge, of course, is whether these measures will be enough to satisfy angry voters in Alberta and Saskatchewan who feel decades of neglect cannot be solved with a few new projects. Looking forward, there are several possible paths for how the WEXIT debate could unfold. None of them are simple, and each comes with its own risks.
Him spending time and energy on his closest friend, his treasured ally,
right?
Since 1867. Like, there's more problems in the world than attacking your closest friend.
So Doug, if I was to put you in that room real quick, if I was to put you in that room with the president today or on the phone, how would you resolve it?
The most likely scenario is that Alberta and Saskatchewan continue using separatist talk as leverage. Instead of leaving Canada, they could sign more interprovincial agreements, push Ottawa for concessions, and build economic corridors. In this scenario, WEXIT becomes less about leaving and more about negotiating better terms inside Confederation. Thanks to Bill 54, it is now easier for Alberta to trigger a referendum If activists succeed in gathering enough signatures, a vote could happen in the next few years. But polls suggest that the majority of Albertans would vote no. A failed referendum would weaken the separatist movement, but it would also pressure Ottawa to offer new autonomy measures to keep the peace. If Alberta or Saskatchewan ever managed to win a referendum by a slim margin, the country would enter uncharted territory. Legally, Ottawa would be required to negotiate, but the process would be long and uncertain. A close result, something like 52% yes and 48% no, would create division within provinces and across Canada. Markets could panic, businesses might hold back investment, and the national mood would be tense for years. This is the most dramatic scenario often discussed online, but it is also the least realistic. Some posts imagine Alberta and Saskatchewan becoming U.S. states, gaining access to American markets and military protection. But legally, this would be almost impossible. It would require not only Canada's consent, but also a constitutional change in the United States. The chance of both countries agreeing is close to zero. Still, the idea remains popular in some online spaces because it feels bold and simple, even if it has no practical path.